I was always afraid of the lunch lady when I was a kid. I couldn't quite put my finger on why. Maybe it was the sharp, toxic stench of her breath, the lifeless look in her eyes, or the strange wart with wiry hairs that dangled from her chin. Whatever the reason, she unsettled me. Every time I passed her in the lunch line, my palms grew clammy, and my heart raced. I never felt at ease until I left the cafeteria. Even then, I was constantly on edge, terrified I might run into her in the hallway. One day, I got into a fight with a kid named Jeremy, and we both ended up with detention. It was his fault, really. As I was walking past him in the hallway, he stuck out his foot, sending me sprawling to the ground. My books went flying, and of course, Samantha, the girl I had a massive crush on, was standing right there. She joined everyone else in laughing at me. Humiliated and furious, I lost control. Before I knew it, Jeremy and I were throwing punches. Teachers broke us up and dragged us to the principal's office. Long story short, I was grounded from fun for the weekend. Instead of playing video games with my friends, I'd be stuck in detention all Saturday. Saturday morning came too soon. My mom, far too chipper for such an ungodly hour, dropped me off outside the school at 8 a.m. The hallways were eerily empty as I trudged to room 126, the usual detention spot. Jeremy was already there, sitting at a desk with two other kids, Nick, the dim-witted quarterback of the football team, and a quiet girl wearing thick glasses. I sat as far away from them as possible. No one spoke. The only sound was the relentless ticking of the clock. After a few minutes of boredom, I turned in my chair to face Jeremy. "Do you know who's running detention today?" I asked. "Kowalski, I think," he muttered. I felt my stomach drop. "Mrs. Kowalski?" Jeremy didn't need to confirm it. The unmistakable stench of her breath filled the room, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I turned slowly, dreading what I'd see. She was there. The lunch lady. Her thick arms clutched a stack of worksheets, and her sour expression could have curdled milk. "Listen up, you little turds," she barked in her gruff, accented voice. "I don't want to be here today any more than you do, so we're going to keep this simple. I'm handing out these worksheets, and you're going to stay quiet. Got it?" We nodded quickly, terrified of her glare. "Good. First sign of trouble, and one of you's going in the oven." She cackled, a low, guttural sound that seemed to echo off the walls. Then she slammed the worksheets down on the desk and left the room. I tried to shake the image of her hairy chin and thick arms, but the words "in the oven" stuck with me. Somehow, I didn't think she was joking. We sat in silence for about 45 minutes, dutifully filling out our worksheets. The lunch lady still hadn't returned. The room grew heavier with every tick of the clock, and eventually, we couldn't take it anymore. We started whispering to each other, testing the boundaries of her absence. "That lunch lady has got to be the ugliest living thing I've ever seen," Jeremy muttered with a grin. Nick snorted. "I bet she's so hairy, you couldn't tell if she was a man or a woman if she took her pants off." No one laughed. The joke fell flat, leaving an uncomfortable silence in its wake. "She hasn't even come back to check on us," Jeremy pointed out. "I bet she went straight home after leaving the room. We should see if we can sneak out." He had just started to rise from his chair when an unexpected sound echoed through the building, a low grinding of metal followed by a sharp hiss of steam. We all froze. The sound was unmistakable. "That's coming from the cafeteria," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why the hell would someone turn on the ovens?" Nick asked, his brows furrowed. "Mrs. Kowalski, maybe," Jeremy replied, though his tone lacked conviction. "Maybe she's hungry. Or maybe she's getting the ovens ready to cook one of us," I joked, though my stomach churned at the thought. Jeremy smirked. "If she's cooking anyone, it's you, man." But the joke didn't land. There was something unnerving about those ovens roaring to life at this hour. Why now? Why not just bring a packed lunch? Was she really cooking something, or someone? We tried to return to our worksheets, but it was no use. Concentration had fled, even for the quiet girl. After a tense few moments, we came to a decision: someone would check the hallway to see if the coast was clear. Jeremy tore a worksheet into 4 pieces and scribbled each of our names on them. Shuffling the scraps in his hand, he turned to Nick. "Pick one." Nick hesitated but finally plucked a piece of paper. He flipped it over. "Ashley." The quiet girl's face turned pale. "No way." "Don't make her do it," I said, shaking my head. "Then you go," Jeremy shot back. "Not a chance," I replied. "This was your idea. You should go." "Shut up, both of you," Nick interrupted. "I'll do it." Without another word, he slipped out the door and disappeared down the hallway. The 3 of us gathered at the doorway, holding our breath and waiting for his return. Minutes passed, each one stretching endlessly. The suspense clawed at my nerves until I was ready to burst. Just as I was about to suggest we go back inside, Nick reappeared at the end of the hallway. He glanced over his shoulder, then motioned for us to join him. I quietly shut the door, and we tiptoed down the hall, every creak of the floorboards amplifying the tension. When we finally reached Nick, he leaned in close, his voice a whisper. "I circled this whole part of the building. She's nowhere in sight. If we're quiet, I think we can make it to the front door without being noticed." "Let's do it," Jeremy whispered, taking the lead. The rest of us followed, pressing ourselves against the walls and straining our ears for the slightest sound of approaching footsteps. The hum and clang of the kitchen equipment still echoed through the empty hallways, a constant reminder of her presence. Finally, we reached the front doors. "Let's get out of here," Jeremy said, grabbing the handle of the nearest door. He yanked it, but it barely budged. Frustrated, he tried another, and another, but the result was the same. "What the hell?" he muttered. "They're chained," Ashley whispered, pointing to the heavy locks and chains looped around the handles. "Let me try," Nick said. He stepped forward and seized the door handle, jerking it violently back and forth. The rattling of metal filled the hallway, far too loud. "You idiot!" I hissed, dragging him away. "What do you think you're doing?" We froze, straining to hear over the pounding of our hearts. At first, there was nothing. But then, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and growing louder. "She's coming," Ashley whispered, her voice trembling. "Run!" I yelled. We scattered like frightened animals. Nick and Ashley bolted to the left while Jeremy and I dashed to the right. As we rounded a corner, Ashley's piercing scream echoed through the halls, followed by the lunch lady's guttural shout. "I've got you." Jeremy and I didn't look back. "This way," he called, veering into a small hallway. We stopped in front of a classroom door. "We can hide in here," he said, shoving it open. Inside, we scrambled for hiding spots. Jeremy dove under the teacher's desk while I wedged myself behind a tall cabinet in the corner. The room fell silent, save for the sound of our ragged breathing and the relentless pounding of our hearts. Minutes passed, feeling like hours. We didn't hear anything, no footsteps, no voices. But we stayed put, unwilling to risk it. Then, faintly, there was a sound. A voice, low and mumbling, drifted down the hallway. At first, it was too quiet to make out, but it was growing louder. Jeremy and I held our breath. "Jeremy? Adam? Guys, where are you?" Jeremy stiffened. He recognized the voice. "It's Nick," he whispered, crawling out from under the desk. He unlocked the door, and Nick stumbled inside, pale and breathless. Jeremy quickly locked the door behind him. "What happened?" Jeremy asked as we crouched behind the desk. "You won't believe it," Nick said between gasps. "I saw her. She got Ashley." "What do you mean, she got her?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "She grabbed her by the arm when Ashley tried to run. Then she hit her over the head with a wrench." "A wrench?" Jeremy hissed. "Keep your voice down." "I'm serious," Nick whispered, his voice shaking. "She knocked her out. Maybe worse." I saw her dragging Ashley's body down the hallway, towards the cafeteria. There was blood. It was all over the floor. Then I came to find you guys. You're saying she killed her? I whispered, horrified. I don't know, Nick stammered. She hit her hard. I just ran before she saw me too. We fell into an uneasy silence. The weight of Nick's words pressed down on us like a suffocating fog. Somewhere in the building, Mrs. Kowalski was lurking. And now, we weren't sure if we were next. We need to get out of here. Now, I said, my voice urgent. We need to find a room with windows. We can break out. Forget it, Jeremy interrupted, shaking his head. You think we can break through that glass? It's reinforced. Unless one of you has a sledgehammer tucked away, we're not going anywhere. There's only one other way out, Nick said grimly. I completed his thought. The back doors. The ones next to the cafeteria. Jeremy nodded. It's the only chance we've got. Then let's go. No time to lose, I urged. We eased the door open, peering up and down the hallway. The coast was clear. Jeremy motioned for us to follow, and we crept down the hall, every step deliberate and careful. The air felt heavier with every inch we moved closer to the cafeteria. We were about halfway there when Mrs. Kowalski's voice crackled through the intercom, distorted but unmistakable. Hello there. We froze. Her thick accent was even more unsettling coming through the static. I see you've left your room. That's unfortunate. However, I promise there will be no consequences if you simply return to room 126. Ashley is waiting for you there. Ashley. Nick gasped. She's alive. I whispered. We have to help her, Nick insisted, his eyes wide with determination. Forget it. She's dead, Jeremy said coldly. We need to get out of here. Now. You didn't see what I saw, Nick snapped. This woman is insane. We can't leave Ashley. Before we could stop him, Nick bolted down the hallway. Nick! What are you doing? I shouted, starting to chase after him. Jeremy grabbed my arm, holding me back. No, Adam. Let him go. We need to leave. Now. He's an idiot, I muttered under my breath as we continued toward the back exit. A blood-curdling scream echoed through the halls, freezing me in my tracks. It was Nick. Jeremy's voice broke the silence. Hurry! We sprinted, the sound of Nick's scream ringing in my ears, twisting my stomach into knots. My nausea grew with every step. The hallway seemed to spin around me, the linoleum floor shifting under my feet. Come on. We're almost there. Jeremy urged, his voice distant in my dizzying haze. And then, we saw it, the back entrance. We made it. Jeremy cried, hope breaking through the panic. We raced toward the doors, our relief short-lived. Jeremy grabbed the handles and yanked. No. No. No, he screamed. The chains rattled mockingly. The doors were locked. I collapsed onto the cold floor, my chest heaving. No, no, I whispered, barely able to breathe. Jeremy threw himself at the doors, yanking at the chains and pounding his fists against the glass. This can't be happening. The cool linoleum felt soothing against my feverish face as I lay there, trying to stop the spinning in my head. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw them. Black boots. I looked up, and there she was. Mrs. Kowalski stood at the end of the hallway, her silhouette illuminated by the flickering overhead lights. She took a slow step forward, then another. The sound of her boots clicking against the floor echoed ominously. In her hand, she clutched a bloody wrench. Jeremy turned, his face pale. Oh God, no, he whispered, backing away from the door. She moved closer, her steps deliberate, her expression unreadable. It was too late. It was all over. I closed my eyes as the lunch lady loomed over me, her shadow swallowing the light. The wrench came down with a sickening crunch on Jeremy's head. His cry echoed through the hallway, raw and filled with pain. She struck him again, harder this time. Blood splattered the walls, painting streaks of crimson that dripped to the floor. She didn't stop. Each blow was more ferocious than the last, accompanied by the wet, sickening sound of metal meeting flesh. I couldn't bear it. My stomach churned, and I vomited, my own bile mixing with the blood pooling near me. The world around me dimmed, and then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, the fluorescent lights overhead burned into my vision, harsh and blinding. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust. My body felt heavy, and as I tried to move, I realized I couldn't. I was tied to a chair. The ropes were coarse and dug into my wrists, holding me immobile. I struggled, twisting and pulling, but it was useless. The knots were too tight. Exhausted, I slumped back and took in my surroundings. The cafeteria was eerily quiet except for the low hum of kitchen equipment in the back. The tables and chairs were neatly arranged, an unsettling contrast to the chaos I'd just experienced. "Ah, you're awake," a voice crooned. I craned my neck, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw her. The lunch lady was in the open kitchen, her bulky frame moving methodically as she prepared something. She didn't look up, but her voice carried easily across the empty space. "Give me just a minute," she said, her thick accent twisting the words unnaturally. "Lunch is almost ready." I thrashed against the ropes again, desperation bubbling inside me, but they wouldn't budge. Defeated, I slumped in the chair and waited, my pulse hammering in my ears. A few minutes later, she emerged, holding a plate with a napkin covering its contents. Her expression was one of smug satisfaction. "Did you have a nice nap?" she asked, her tone mocking. I didn't answer. She set the plate on a table nearby, her movements deliberate. "You know," she said, her voice tinged with bitterness, "I could have killed you, too. But out of the goodness of my heart, I decided to spare you. And, as a bonus, I cooked you a delicious meal." I stayed silent, refusing to meet her gaze. "So what?" "No thank you," she snapped. "Is this how you repay me for all my hard work? For sweating away in that filthy kitchen to feed ungrateful brats like you?" She paused, her eyes narrowing. 19 years. I've been doing this for 19 years. You kids come through that line, grab your food, and walk away. Not one of you says, "Thank you." Not one. Her voice rose, and I flinched as she moved behind me, grabbing the back of my chair and shoving it toward the table. The plate sat directly in front of me, and my stomach turned. "I've had enough," she said, her voice low and menacing. "No more." She leaned down and unbound my arms just enough to let me move them from the elbows up. Then she set a fork beside the plate. "I made you a meal," she said. "You will eat now." With a dramatic flourish, she pulled the napkin off the plate. I gagged, turning away as bile rose in my throat. On the plate sat a grotesque collection of human remains. A sausage, thick and greasy, lay at the center, surrounded by cooked fingers, toes, ears, and eyes that seemed to stare back at me in silent accusation. "You eat," she commanded. I shook my head, bile stinging my throat. No, I can't." She raised the bloodstained wrench, her expression darkening. "You eat, or I hit," she said, her voice icy and final. Tears streamed down my face as I turned back to the plate. The stench was unbearable, the sight horrifying. My stomach churned violently, threatening to empty again. I can't do it," I stammered. "I can't." Her grip on the wrench tightened, and she took a step closer. She brought the wrench down on my head again, sending searing pain through my skull. I screamed, my voice raw and hoarse. "Eat," she bellowed, her voice shaking with fury. With trembling hands, I reached for the fork. My vision blurred with tears as I stabbed at the grotesque sausage. My head throbbed with every heartbeat, a relentless reminder of the punishment I'd already endured. I cut off a piece, its texture soft and greasy under the tines of the fork. My stomach rebelled, but I forced it into my mouth, biting down and chewing mechanically. The taste was metallic, salty, and something else, something I couldn't place but wished I never had to taste again. "Good," she said, her voice laced with cruel satisfaction. "Finish it all." I shook my head, sobbing. I couldn't do it. Without hesitation, the wrench came down again, striking the side of my head. I crumpled forward with a cry of pain, my vision spinning. "Eat," she screamed again, her voice now a guttural roar. Blinded by pain and fear, I obeyed. Bite after bite, I choked down the sausage, my body trembling with every swallow. Tears streamed down my face, mixing with the blood dripping from the fresh wounds on my head. Whenever I hesitated, she raised the wrench threateningly, and I forced myself to keep eating. Each bite was harder than the last, my stomach twisting and threatening to revolt. I wanted to vomit, to scream, to fight back, but I knew it was useless. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I swallowed the last bite. My body sagged in the chair, drained of all strength. I stared at the empty plate, my mind numb with shock and horror. She leaned in, her rancid breath hot against my cheek. "Very good," she cooed, taking the plate from the table. "I'm glad you enjoyed it." I couldn't reply. My voice was gone, stolen by pain and terror. She straightened up, gripping the wrench tightly. Her eyes gleamed with hunger as she took a step closer. "Now that you've had your lunch," she said, her tone almost cheerful, "it's time for me to have mine." My heart froze. I looked up at her, my vision swimming. She raised the wrench high above her head, a malicious grin spreading across her face. "No, please," I whispered, the words barely audible. The last thing I saw was the wrench descending, a blur of rusted steel in the harsh fluorescent light. I closed my eyes. And then, there was nothing.